morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to A Word on Cybersecurity, this one for the week of May 29th, 2022. I'm your host, Kurt Franklin, Senior Analyst at Omdia, and I'm joined today by one of my favorite guests, a repeat guest here on A Word on Cybersecurity, our principal managing analyst. Did I get the words right? Managing principal managing. Anyway, senior guy, big honcho, chief kahuna at Omdia Cybersecurity, Eric Parizo. Eric, welcome to A Word on Cybersecurity.
Thank you, Kurt. As always, really, the biggest honor I have is just to be here with you. And listen, I'm going to be honest. This to me, this is just one step on the journey. My goal is to be the first member of the Word on Cybersecurity Five Timers Club. So I'm a long way. I've got some steps to take, but I'm dedicated. I think I can get there.
And you say that without even having seen the plaque that comes with that honor. So it's something to look forward to.
Just a bonus.
Well, speaking of things to look forward to, Eric and I are both getting ready to hop on a plane for what will, for me, be the first big business trip of 2022, heading out to the RSA conference in San Francisco next week. Now, for those of you who keep up with cybersecurity, the RSA conference is traditionally in February. It's traditionally one of those early year things. It happens then, and then some other security conferences happen through the year. The mid-year big conference is Black Hat, which we will also be going to. But this year, because COVID, it got pushed to June. Black Hat is still going to be coming along in August, but it means that these two are much closer together than traditional. And I think it's going to be interesting to see which companies and which researchers have products and information at RSA and which are holding off until Black Hat. Now, we would normally give you the word for this week, and I'm going to be honest, the word for this week for me would be boring. It just hasn't been a big, exciting week. Some people were arrested, some networks were shut down, a couple of attacks happened that were of moderate size. If you're a victim, it was a horrible week. If you're not, it was just another week in the cybersecurity industry. Eric, do you have a much different view of the week that's now coming to an end?
No, as I think you mentioned earlier, Kurt, I think even the adversaries were maybe taking a lighter week out of the office in preparation for what may come next week in conjunction with RSA conference. Although, as we know, they never seem to rest for very long. But no, I've got definitely some things we can talk about in terms of what I'm looking forward to for next week.
Outstanding. Well, as do I, because let me give you a bit of insight into the world of a journalist or analyst in our community. Starting about 3 months ahead of one of these big events, our email traffic starts to pick up with companies saying, hey, we're going to be at upcoming big event, and we know that your visit would not be complete unless you met with our important executive, because we're going to be talking about thing that you don't care about, but we hope you will. And so could you block off some amount of time to meet with us? And the volume just increases with each passing week until it hits probably the apex of traffic about 2 weeks ahead of the event. And then it starts to taper off. I will tell you, it's Friday. The event starts Monday. I've gotten 3 or 4 email messages today going, hey, our CEO is going to be in San Francisco. Wouldn't you like to meet with him or her? And the answer for any of you analysts, relations people who might be watching is no, no, sorry, that boat has sailed. So, yeah, and Eric, I suspect your inbox traffic has had the same sort of curve.
It has, and I have a little empathy because we are sort of getting back into the swing of things with RSA Conference 2022. It's been a rough couple of years in terms of in-person events. It's been very challenging for all the reasons everyone is aware of. But for the first time in a long time, it feels like with this year's event, we're kind of finally getting back to the good old days of everyone getting together in cybersecurity for that big annual in-person confab. So I think people are kind of, and obviously there's always a lot of turnover in these companies. So it's getting used to that process again. So there's going to be some that are a little later to the game, which is why, I always, don't tell, just between you and me, Kurt. I always keep a couple emergency slots in case something really important comes up at the last minute to have a meeting there. But yeah, it's tough. Generally speaking, if you want to meet with an analyst at RSA conference, you've got to reach out 4 to 6 weeks in advance minimum, and because our schedules have been pretty full for a while.
Yeah, I think I'm down to pre-breakfast cup of coffee meetings and post-dinner cup of something dinner
Yeah.
meetings at this point.
I'm definitely not taking any meetings at the gym, so we're pretty much out of spots at this point.
Well, I wanted to. You and I were talking ahead of airtime about some of the things we're looking forward to, and I wanted to throw out a couple of words because I think that a couple of words lead to some of the very specifics that you're talking about. One of the things that I am noting that's happening is a little bit of consolidation. Now, this always happens in our industry. A company will spring up with some new technology, process, new something, and often their business strategy is to be acquired by another larger company. But it seems like coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing that activity step up just a little bit. Are there any of these joinings together of companies or products that you've noted and that you're going to be talking about next week?
Well, I was thinking about that a little while ago, Kurt, in terms of the framework of which vendors have the most on the line, the most to gain or lose at RSA next week, and a couple kind of came to mind for me. The first one, along the lines of what you talk about, is Google Cloud security specifically, because they've been around for a little while now. They've had some plays. They obviously have their Chronicle Next Gen SIM, which is their flagship product, as well as a few other pieces. But they obviously have made major moves in the last few months with the acquisition of SOAR vendor Simplify, and of course, more recently with the announced deal to acquire Mandiant. So they are dramatically reshaping their organization and what they can do, and with the goal of trying to build the industry's premier security operations center platform. So I'm very curious to see what their strategy is and how much we're going to learn about how they're going to pull everything together. Um, IBM, I would put in that category as well. I'm more concerned about IBM because they've had some significant talent losses lately. They're having a very minimal presence at the show. They've made some moves that have been hard to understand. Their React acquisition um, meant to kind of propel them forward in XDR. It seems like it was a bit of a panic move. To be frank, I'm not entirely sure of the direction of IBM security right now, and I think Mary O'Brien has some serious questions to answer. And I'm not confident we're going to get a lot of that at RSA next week. But the biggest one, I would say, in terms of vendors that have the most to gain or lose, Number one by far for me is Trellix, because obviously we've been watching that situation with McAfee and FireEye and what became Mandiant for quite some time. Trellix is kind of the one of the key spin out pieces, along with Sky High, of course, being that cloud SASE focused piece, and Trellix kind of taking the rest of those legacy pieces and building XDR on top of it. But I think it's going to be a huge week and a huge keynote for new CEO Brian Palma to really make the Trellix message clear. Who are they? What are they trying to do? And how are they going to get there? So that's probably the one I'm most eager to learn about.
Yeah, of the things that you talked about, to me, Trellix has a significant messaging uh, role to fill, because they're going to need to let people know, first of all, who their ancestors were, why this new company Trellix is actually a bunch of what should be familiar companies, and why Trellix is stronger now than the parent company was 18 months ago. How division has made them stronger. And I think that's going to be an interesting messaging. Um, uh,
Absolutely. You and I have talked about this in the past, Kurt. It's a very controversial move when an existing company decides it's going to shed its existing brand or brands and essentially, start new with a brand new, outbound message, just reshaping itself for the marketplace. And generally speaking, I am of the mind that you do not want to sacrifice your current brand unless you absolutely have no choice, unless there's so much negative connotation to it that you just can't live with it anymore. And we've written about it a lot, but the biggest example in recent years, I think, is ForcePoint. They had a number of established legacy brands with WebSense and obviously a lot of the Raytheon technology. They had the StoneSoft and Sidewinder firewall technology. They're all brands that the marketplace knew well, but they decided, because they wanted to try to carve a new identity, they were going to develop this new identity in ForcePoint. And I would argue that, 5 years later, I'm not convinced that the marketplace even knows who ForcePoint is and what they're about today. So I think it's a lesson in caution as far as brand development. And I think personally, it was probably a mistake for Trellix to abandon its legacy brands. If I would have kept the FireEye brand if I were them. But ultimately, I think they're trying. It's that's why I think next week is so big for them, because it's a huge spotlight opportunity to deliver a clear, concise, simple message about who Trellix is and what they're about.
Speaking of messages, you talk about Alphabet, Google, and their move into security. And I think one of the interesting things about that is what it portends for another company, because there are four huge cloud, public cloud vendors. There is Alphabet, Google. There is IBM. There's Microsoft with Azure. And there's Amazon with AWS. Of those four, three of them now have significant security plays. What is Amazon going to do? Is Amazon going to maintain its focus on being a pure play cloud service provider? Where if you want compute power, if you want storage, they're your people. If you need security, there are all sorts of companies who work with them. Or will they end up jumping in and buying their own security components to add to the offering as well? To me, that's the fascinating thing that Google's latest moves really bring into focus for the overall market.
Yeah, my opinion has been pretty constant on this for the last few years, and I think it's still unchanged for the most part. My thinking has been that AWS has had such a significant market share lead for such a long time that they didn't, and then that's still the case today. And they don't really need to go down the security path. I've always felt like Azure at first, and then IBM, and now Alphabet to a lesser degree, pursued security in large part as a way to differentiate their cloud infrastructure offerings, to say that, listen, one of the reasons you should choose us is because we have a much bigger, better, more capable security stack that's tightly integrated with the cloud infrastructure. And Amazon, in contrast, because they're so big, they don't need that. They have some small pieces of it, but ultimately they don't need to do that. Plus, they've also had the benefit of because they're not the big player in the market, they've had a robust ecosystem of third-party security partners for a long time. The Trend Micros and Palo Alto Networks, and the list goes on, that have eagerly sought to ingratiate themselves into the AWS marketplace, and offer their solutions there to AWS customers. So eventually, will it get to the point where Amazon feels like it has to do more? I think so. I think it will. But ultimately, I think it can solve that problem pretty quickly with some acquisitions if it wants to. But for now, I think that landscape's going to remain unchanged for a while.
Well, for a lot of companies, cloud is part of a strategy to lessen their dependence on resources that have a geographical focus. And that brings me a word that I'm hearing a lot these days. It's a little bit of a new buzzword, or a newly prominent buzzword, and that's resilience. We're hearing companies change their message from cybersecurity to cyber resilience. Is that something that you're noticing at all in the messages you're getting ahead of the show?
Absolutely. And that was really what I was going to put forward as my word of the week for you, Kurt: resilience, because I think increasingly organizations have come around, even decision makers, CIOs and C-level, board level decision makers in enterprises have come around to the understanding that cybersecurity isn't about a quick fix or a series of implementations. It's about a holistic program that then dictates what your architecture and ultimately your business objectives are, right? So I think resilience helps put that in a context that more decision makers can understand, because ultimately cybersecurity is about ensuring the resilience of the business, particularly from a technology standpoint. You're trying to prevent cybersecurity attacks in the first instance, but you're not going to be able to 100% do that all the time. So you're going to also need to detect those incidents quickly. You're going to need the capability to investigate and understand what happened. Assign a risk level to what's events happening in your organization, respond effectively, validate that response, and ultimately learn and improve on what that life cycle, so that you're making that process better and better all the time. And I think resilience is a great way to describe all that. So we're seeing that across the board with numerous vendors, Cisco, Splunk, OpenText, all doubling down on the theme of resilience. So I personally expect that to be one of the biggest themes we'll see next week at RSA Conference 2022.
You mentioned something in that I think is really important, and it plays with another word that has been growing in importance over the last few years. That word is risk. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing risk and resilience used far more often is precisely what you say. You have to have a way to talk about cybersecurity with C-level executives and executive board members. And especially with board members, they want, and often by charter can't, get involved with operational aspects. They're not down in the trenches. They're not making tactical decisions for individual departments like the cybersecurity department. And so when you use words like cybersecurity, their eyes glaze over because it's not within their normal job description to deal with that. But when you use words like risk, when you use words like resilience, these are words that they're used to dealing with in sort of a global sense. And so when you can put cybersecurity in those terms, now you've got a common language with which you can communicate to the board. And when you can communicate to the board, among other things, you can get investment from the board. And so this is something that's going to be increasingly important for CIOs, CISOs, all of the people in the cybersecurity chain of command to master this language if they want to continue to get investment from the business in what they're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll actually turn that back to you, Kurt, because it's what's fascinating to me is that I feel like there's a bit of a dichotomy in a way between the concepts of resilience and risk. Resilience seems to be gaining traction as a viable way to convey ultimately what an enterprise cybersecurity program is supposed to do, what its objectives are, and how it's relevant to the business. Whereas risk, I feel like, is perhaps going the other direction and becoming a little bit more challenging of a concept, because I know based on what I'm seeing in vendor solutions out there, there is a dramatic difference in how risk is defined, how it's measured, and ultimately how it can be acted on by enterprise cybersecurity organizations. So I'm curious for your opinion as the lead of Omdia Cyber's enterprise security management research practice, what you think about the perception of risk right now.
Well, risk is important because of a couple of key developments. One is that risk comes to the world of the board because of the financial risk committees and divisions that so many companies have. I mean, obviously, people in fintech, in the financial technology world, people in banking, people in all these, they have financial risks. This is what actuaries do. This is what the people who decide whether or not they're going to let a loan go forward do. They are risk assessments. So the board is used to the language of risk, and they're used to couching that in financial terms. What is the risk reward calculation for something? And so being able to put a cybersecurity posture in terms of risk means that it's couched in language that they understand. So that's the good thing. It gives a common language. The bad news, as you point out, is that there is no single way to assess and measure risk. Now, there are a number of organizations and companies and groups that try to do this, that offer frameworks. NIST has a risk framework. There's an organization called the FAIR Institute that has a risk framework. There are a bunch of others. And just about any SIM company that you want to talk about has a way of quantifying risk. What we don't have is a Rosetta Stone by which one of these frameworks, one of these ways of calculating risk can be translated into any other. And so what we're lacking is a way for an organization to compare their risk, their current level of risk, to the levels of risk that are normative in their industry segment. So you don't have a manufacturer, say, who can say, well, our risk is here, and that means that we are on a par with our industry, or we're behind, so we need to improve, or we're doing pretty well, so we need to. There's none of that translation that happens. And I think that's a real issue. Now, when I hear about resilience, I tend to put that in terms of what used to be called business continuity. So resilience is if the worst fears of your risk managers come to pass, how well do you recover from that? And you can put that in different terms. How brittle are you? And I think that we have seen, for example, in the last 2 years, that many organizations' supply chains might have been very strong, but they were highly brittle. Because when the pandemic and everything that surrounded it hit, the supply chains broke and broke badly. And in many cases, we did not have a high supply chain resilience. I mean, face it, most of these supply chains broke 24 months ago, and we haven't fully recovered yet. Imagine what would happen to an organization if their accounts receivables were in the same situation. So to me, resilience, and that's why I'm seeing a number of companies that have added things like backup and recovery to their portfolio. And when they had something like that, then they started talking about resilience. When they added, as you said, the response mechanism, not just we'll tell you what the dangers are, we'll tell you how to deal with them, but we will help you respond to them. That's when you get into the resilience thing. And the more layers of response, the more compelling the resilience message. Or that's my take from this point. I'm afraid that for many vendors, resilience is one of those new hot buzzwords, and I'm not convinced by every one of the resilience messages that's coming out now. I know this is shocking, but I need someone to use smaller words and shorter sentences to convince me of some of these things that are going on.
No, I mean you know how it is in this industry, Kurt. There's no such thing as an underused buzzword, right? Once once a couple people start using it, it's everywhere. I mean, we've seen that with zero trust, where it's just become zero trust is its own track at RSA conference this year for the first time, which tells you everything you need to know. But you make some good points there. Let me just couple things that come to mind for me. The business continuity point is really interesting to me. I want to think about that some more. I reserve the right to change my mind, but I think those are definitely closely aligned terms. I feel like business continuity is almost like the theory, the study of it, of understanding, okay, how, what does my business need to sustain itself, to maintain itself, to grow. Whereas resilience is sort of the practice of it, right? It's the operational capabilities put in place to ensure that you have business continuity, particularly from a cybersecurity perspective. So I really like that observation. I think those are indeed closely aligned. And I would say perhaps the biggest reason why we're now talking about business continuity and resiliency is shockingly, we're 30 minutes in here and we haven't mentioned it yet, is the ongoing scourge of that is ransomware. I mean, I think we as analysts tend to be more forward leaning. So we tend to look a little bit less at what's happening right now and a little bit more about what's coming down the road. But um, there's absolutely no question that ransomware remains the number one cybersecurity concern for enterprises essentially everywhere. And it only continues to grow. These aren't our numbers, so take them with a grain of salt. But I saw according to CyberSecurity Ventures, we had 20 billion in global losses from ransomware last year. On track, if that remains unchecked, for 265 billion in annual losses from ransomware by 2031. So we're at the point where this is the top tier issue that enterprises are dealing with from a cybersecurity standpoint. So enterprises are looking for everything and anything that can proactively prevent and in turn quickly limit damage from ransomware when preventions fail. And by and large, we've seen no silver bullet. You know, there are solutions that do fairly well, but there's no universal answer to ransomware yet. And so I think that's, again, a theme we're going to see at the show this year is enterprises looking for those answers. Can anyone step up and provide better solutions for ransomware?
And, it should be noted that the organizations are being pushed in this direction by two groups. There are, for example, jurisdictions that have criminalized paying ransom in an effort to make ransomware a non-viable attack strategy. And then there are the cyber insurers who have been on the hook for ransomware payments, who are now saying, if you want us to offer you coverage, you better make sure that we're unlikely to have to make that payment. The good news is that these insurers are often making technology and process recommendations in addition to demands. So I think that that's a good thing, but you're absolutely right. And it's worth noting that the ransomware criminals themselves are not static. They are constantly evolving their attacks to keep this particular vector a viable tool in their offensive tool chest. So, it's not like we can say, well, ransomware is this static thing. If we can figure out how to defeat it once, it will go away. Now that it has been known to succeed, the criminals are going to riff on that for as long as they can, with things like the multi-phase attacks that include extortion. That include, we have exfiltrated data, and if you, before encrypting it, so even if you decrypt, we'll release it and embarrass you, cause you to be subject to penalties, whatever. So this is not going away. It's certainly not anytime soon.
Sad but true.
Well, while ransomware is not going away, we are, because we have bumped up against the limits of our time. Eric, I know I'm on a plane on Sunday, the coming tropical storm allowing, and I'm looking forward to seeing you and the rest of our colleagues out in San Francisco. For those of you listening, either live or on a recording, I am planning to do, first of all, I will be back in the office, so there will be another LinkedIn Live RSA wrap-up next Friday. But I'm also planning to do a couple of LinkedIn Lives, little short things from the show, because I want to get some things out while they're fresh in my mind. Please also look for our Twitters. I'm at KG4GWA. Eric, your Twitter handle is?
At Eric Parizo, Eric with a C, Parizo.
Please follow both of us, because we're going to be just tweeting like mad while we're out there. And we both have a bunch of stuff coming up. Eric, you have anything in particular that people should be on the lookout for in the next couple of weeks?
Well, let me just mention two things. One, we're starting a big XDR research cycle. We're going to have the fundamentals report on comprehensive XDR. That's the one-stop shop, the all-in-one vendor XDR platform, coming up soon. And then that'll be followed by our Omdia Universe comparative research, head-to-head analysis of the best comprehensive XDR solutions in the industry. That'll be coming up later this year. And then I would just throw in a quick plug while we're talking about events. Our favorite event will be coming up in August. That's Black Hat USA 2022 in Las Vegas. And as part of that, we will be hosting the first ever in-person Omdia Analyst Summit at Black Hat. That will be Tuesday, August 9th. Registration is available now. You can apply to attend. It's free to qualified attendees. Please visit the registration page. It's at blackhat.com. We'd love to see you in Las Vegas with us in August.
Absolutely, positively. And as for me, I get back from RSA. I get to spend 3 glorious nights at home before heading back out on the road. I'll be attending Splunk's conference 2022 and be reporting from that. The week after that, I've got a big webinar coming up where we look at software supply chain issues and basically what to do once you find out that yours has been under attack. So for the registration page, please go to darkreading.com/Omdia. You'll see it there along with missives from all of the Omdia cybersecurity analysts. But as for us, thanks for being here either in person or on a recorded version. Look for us roughly at this time every week. And we will look forward to seeing you from RSA. For Eric Parizo, I'm Kurt Franklin. See you next time.